Susan, it's so wonderful to talk to you today. A large part of how I consider you and think about you is your history of being a Chicagoan. Can you tell us a bit about how that has laid the foundation for some of the work that you do here?
Sure. I was born and grew up on the Southeast Side in South Shore. I went to Bowen High School, Chicago Public Schools, and then I came to college here and was totally intimidated by the kids from New York. But I had an interesting and good experience in a very pivotal moment in Chicago, 68 to 72. The Black Panther leader, Fred Hampton, was assassinated when we were second-year students during finals week of fall quarter. And those kinds of things happening around you, the Democratic Convention in 68, that kind of marks who you are in terms of how you see yourself in society. And being a Chicagoan and having been a lawyer for 20 years in the city before I came to teach here, just helped me have what I didn't realize until I had to explain it to somebody. It's like a really deep bench of friends and contacts of people I'd worked with in various projects and causes, et cetera. And then, and also I think being a really sort of deeply embedded Chicagoan helped me doing international work, because I never had kind of a romantic view of the work I was doing in Mexico or Latin America. I mean, when I first went to Mexico, the people I met were university students like me. And so I didn't have this kind of help our little brown brothers attitude towards Mexico. And I wasn't particularly romantic about it. It was a place where I met people, got to understand what the social problems were there, developed relationships. This is sort of during my career as a lawyer, following up on the fact that I'd gone to Mexico to learn Spanish before law school. And that kind of, I think, really helped me later when I began to try to assess social and political situations in other countries in order to help our students find internships. But I'm getting ahead of the story. But being a Chicagoan, I think, gave me a sense of identity and place and a deep understanding of local history that helped me understand other histories about other places.
It feels like, as one of those people from New York you just spoke about, who then came here and was able to take a class with you in Bernardine Dohrn, one of the best experiences of my educational life, and then come up in the internship program that you created. It feels like that sense of being in place here, part of the university, part of the academy, but then understanding from you and from your framing that I would really learn by going out into the world and learning, not bringing, but learning, taking back into my education what I did and how I did it. That was sort of a pedagogy I didn't even know was happening to me when it was happening. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, sort of the way I thought about it and what my elevator speech would be to alums and donors and foundations is that we were operating on a model which I called theory, practice, theory, that students had to study human rights before they went out into the world. Then they would go out and have some practical experience. And we spent a lot of time talking to them about what's it going to be like to parachute into somebody else's reality, somebody else's problems. And then after their experience, they would come back and have a different understanding of the theory that they were studying because of their real world experience. Early in my tenure, Dean Boyer and I agreed to not give internships to graduating students anymore because we wanted the internship to be really integrated into what they were doing and impacting how they looked at their academic work here at the university. So that was kind of the model we were using.
I have a follow-up question about that. When I think about my peers back when I did this internship, which was a minute ago, and then now some of the students that I see and teach going out to do these internships, I wonder how you think about the sort of scope of who came through that program and what your hopes for it originally were, and then what it sort of turned into over your time here.
Well, I think because I'm a lawyer, I thought I came into the Human Rights Program thinking, we're going to turn out a bunch of baby lawyers. But it turns out, no, there are at least as many pre-meds and students who go on to do things like become filmmakers and journalists and run NGOs and get masters in public policy and social work and stuff. So it was I didn't have a predetermined idea of what they were going to do. But in the later years I was here 19 years, in the latter part of that, students who had been in the early cohorts of internships were now starting to work at and then be directors of organizations. So we had this kind of feedback loop where they knew what the internship program was about. They, of course, knew, like everybody, even not alums, that the University of Chicago students would be very smart and work hard, that they would be employing the new cohorts of interns 5, 10, 15 years after they had been interns themselves. So that was a great pleasure to see over the course of a couple of decades, people running important organizations and doing really good work out in the world, whether as doctors, heading NGOs, journalists, scholars, etc. So I don't know if I had a preconceived idea, but I'm happy about the way it turned out.
To have seeded the world of human rights activists and actors and agents.
And as I get to be as I got into my 60s, and then later, it was like the people who were my peers were starting to retire. And the people running the organizations were not only younger colleagues, but former students. So that the kinds of credibility you get because the director knows you, you know the director, that had originally been my peers was then becoming generations of people who had gone through our programs or were friends of people who had gone through our programs.
When I think about the impact as a fellow of the program, it changed, in my opinion, certainly the city. So I was one who stayed and did domestic work, but the globe. How do you understand and think about the responsibility of a university to play that kind of a role in a city or around the world to these were paid internships that were often accelerating the mission of other organizations. So talk to us about your thoughts on responsibility or what role a university should play in sort of building that capacity.
I think there are a couple of things. And one is that, you both know, since you've supervised young people doing things, that sometimes it's almost you give as much in terms of time and energy to training an intern as you're going to get back from them, and then they're gone in 10 weeks. So that's kind of a challenge there, because we are grateful to the organizations that take interns, because we know it's kind of an imposition on their time, but they are also people who believe in educating the upcoming generation. So it's not just a kind of, cost-effective model to, am I going to get out of this? But I think that we have a lot of resources that are useful when we engage with the outside world, useful to the outside world. One is, and some of our students have come back and done projects directly following off of their internships. So Jasmine Heiss, for example, came back from a photography project in a poor neighborhood in Buenos Aires and did an exhibition here at the university of photographs. She came back on an arts grant, and that exposed that organization to a public that had not heard of their work, and developed some interesting cross discussions about how do you empower youth to be taking pictures of their own environment, and what does that do? So that was just one example of it. But it was also that we were able to, and this is beyond the internship program, bring human rights practitioners, activists, lawyers, doctors, etc., to campus through the programs that we created. So we had the Kirshner Lecture, named after Dr. Bob Kirshner, where we would get some very interesting figures in the human rights world to come once a year and talk. And then later, with Ann and Richard Pozen, who were our wonderful, wonderful benefactors, we created a visiting professorship. And I think I was explaining before, when we started the visiting professorship, I managed to get Albie Sachs, now the retired justice of the South African Constitutional Court, to come and be our first Pozen professor, because we knew he would just be such a hit and charm the Pozens and everybody else, that really sort of started off that program in a very good way. And embedded in both the Kirshner Lecture and the Pozen professorships was an idea that since we had the resources to bring these amazing people to campus, that it was incumbent on us, as a wealthy institution, to make the encounters with those folks accessible to other people in the city. So when Juan Mendez, former UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, came to be, I think it was when he came to do the Kirshner Lecture, or it might have been just a special standalone, we had him do a lecture at International House. The mothers of prisoners in the TAM Supermax prison and mothers of the survivors of the John Birch torture cases came to greet him with flowers. And we had a packed hall, and it was with a lot of outreach to community, and just the little things we tried to be thoughtful of. A lot of things that happen at the university, you hear about 2 days before they're going to happen because they're aimed at an audience that's already here. Well, if you're serious about bringing in people from the outside world, you have to establish networks and contacts. And I remember one event we did, we had a very important journalist from Mexico, Kari Moragne-Patterson, and she was speaking at Kent, which is a building in the middle of the campus. And so we knew that she would be popular among the regular Mexican immigrant community here. So on the evening of her talk, I had students stationed on 59th Street, on Ellis, on 57th Street, and on University with copies of the poster so that people who could not figure out where was Kent Hall, because it doesn't really have a street address you can find, would see somebody with a sign and they would know where to go. And that was a hugely successful event. I remember Professor Emilio Curi said who's a professor of history of Mexico, he'd never seen as many actual Mexicans in one place on the campus as for that. So, being self-conscious about how we relate to the outside world. The other thing we did when Juan Mendez was here was that we arranged for him to meet at the People's Law Office with survivors of torture and a couple of guys who had been released from the TAM Supermax prison. And it was a very important moment, and I think the university should be proud of the fact that we were able to facilitate that happening because he came in and the people there knew here's this United Nations official and everybody's kind of a little stiff. And as soon as Juan said that when he was a lawyer in Argentina, he had been imprisoned and tortured, immediately everybody's faces changed. People just relaxed and felt like this guy understands us. And so our capacity as an institution with the contacts and resources to bring people from around the country, international figures, into Chicago and to have an impact and dialogue on our campus and also have that dialogue extend beyond the walls of the campus is something. And I think it's partly because I'm a Chicagoan. I grew up in the whole city, and so thinking about what's going on around us and going from the local, act locally, think globally, that kind of helped frame the way we did events.
As you're talking, I can't help thinking about the deep connections between the global and the local. And so one of the connections that we've been talking about before we sat down was the fact that torture and human rights violations don't just happen out there, they happen right here. And it was in your class that I really learned about that so deeply. And I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about the John Birch torture work.
Just for people watching this who don't know the story, there was a set of cases that began to come to light in the early 80s of the actual torture techniques used by Chicago police, a particular crew in Area 2 police headquarters, about 3 miles from the university campus. And those cases started to come to light because one of the men who had been tortured, though actually it was the brothers, the Wilson brothers, got in touch with, it was a doctor of Cook County Hospital noticed that they had very unusual marks on them when they were brought in for a medical exam between the police station and Cook County Jail. And that started a chain of events where they got a lawyer, they were having a trial in federal court, a reporter, it was a People's Law Office representing them, a reporter from the Chicago Reader, John Conroy, heard that there was this interesting trial. He started writing about it. And during that trial, they used to call him Deep Badge, a member of the Chicago police wrote to the lawyers and said, go talk to so-and-so and so-and-so in Cook County Jail. And it turned out that there were over 100 African-American men who had been tortured, many of them confessing to crimes they did not commit, serving very long periods of time in jail. And the organizing work done once this group of cases came to light, and organizing done by some of the men themselves who were on death row and formed themselves as the Death Row 10, really became like a social movement in the city. And at one point, I mean, sort of where I came into it, besides for being a spectator and like anybody else knowing what was going on and knowing the lawyers, and I'd been to a couple of days of the Wilson trial just to see it, was that Stan Willis, who was an alum of the college also, and one of the lawyers on those cases, came to speak to my class about them. And then he turns to me and says, well, Susan, can we do something with this human rights stuff? And I consulted with Elena Olea, who was a Colombian lawyer living in Chicago, who had lots of experience in international human rights, and we ended up helping to facilitate. I remember meeting at the law school with law faculty, clinical faculty, Locke Bowman and Randolph Stone, lawyers from the People's Law Office, Joey Mogul, Flint Taylor, talking about how do we bring these cases to an international forum. And that was successful, and one out of those is the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, the United Nations Commission Against Torture, don't really have enforcement power. They can't send the blue helmets to Chicago. But it's the naming and shaming. It's getting press about it. It's knowing that you're getting media attention that brings the idea that the whole world is watching what's happening in Chicago. And that was a very powerful lesson for those of us working on it, and then which I was able to transmit to my students. And for a while, for 3 years, I taught a seminar exclusively devoted to those cases because there were so many streams of advocacy. There were artists who organized an art exhibit. There were lawyers. There were community organizers who started an organization called Black People Against Police Torture that decided to focus on the state legislative effort to put together the Torture Commission, which, Kathy, you're now a member of, right, to examine cases. And so it became a good vehicle for teaching human rights by taking this set of cases. I stopped teaching the seminar in 2015 when the city council voted the historic reparations ordinance, and also because I thought that my friends and the various survivors, the lawyers, the artists, they'd come to enough classes and, had told their story enough for the benefit of our students. I still incorporate those cases into the contemporary issues course, but doing a whole course on them was something that the resources this university has enabled me to be able to do, and to be able to illuminate things to our students that are happening in the community around them and that they might not have heard about otherwise. So,
Legacy.
What a story. Like, I learned something new about you every time we talk, because I've known you for a while.
Well, I think it's really cool that you're not the
re-examine the torture. Amazing. A joint final question from Jess and I about your legacy, Susan. What do you think your legacy is that you're leaving at the University of Chicago, particularly Pozen, and what do you hope for the center for its?
Well, I think the only thing you can count on is what the students do with it, because the format of the way classes are designed, the way any particular center is run, is going to change over time, and between one leadership and then another one, there are differences. So I think, to me, and I'm still teaching, which is great, and I have all these eager, serious students, that hopefully, and I say to them at the end of the contemporary issues course that I give what I call my Spider-Man speech, which is, with great power comes great responsibility, right? That's Spider-Man. And what that means is, since they are coming out of a very prestigious university with a very good education, most of them are going to end up in leadership roles in some kind of entity, whether it's that they're the president of the parent-teacher organization at their kid's school, whether they are a CEO of a corporation, whether they have a hedge fund, whether they're a doctor, whether they're a filmmaker, artists, lawyers, etc. That I want them to think about the impact on the rights of human beings in the work that they do, and be able to take positions on issues and be articulate about them, and become, if the goal of a liberal arts education is to develop people's notions of citizenship, then it seemed to me that putting international human rights into that made the students into better global citizens, because they began to think in terms that the rest of the world used. The language of human rights might have been strange to them when they started, but hopefully they became comfortable enough with it that they could begin to think globally about what it meant. So that's, I think, what what I would hope my legacy is that students have that takeaway, that they don't have to be a human rights professional to be conscious about human rights and their obligations as committed citizens to their communities.
As two people who came up under your guidance and mentorship and friendship now, I think we can agree that legacy is it lives on
Forever.
and we're here to make sure of it.
And it was all about opening the door for people who had talents and energy and wanted to figure out where they were going to put them. And I'm very proud of the two of you. They're great.